Did you know the surprising number of objects that you use every day are thanks to accidents? Let me show you what I mean. On this episode, we learn how messing around with a scientific toy leads to the X-ray.
Oh, you can see inside me.
Find out the bald truth behind the cure for hair loss.
This poor woman has hair all over her face.
And discover how an invention to keep people cool ends up making a lot of them very hot.
You get a crazy situation where motorists in the United States would keep their windows rolled up to pretend they had aircon.
Oops, I changed the world. This is the story of the X-ray. A life-changing, and for many people life-saving, innovation. Invented by this guy, Wilhelm Röntgen. More about him later. For most of human history, the only way to find out what's inside the human body was to open it up and have a look.
It's the golden age of Greek civilization, and with that comes new heights in architecture, in science, and also anatomy.
Herophilus in the 3rd century BC is generally considered to be the father of anatomy, at least in the Western tradition. He was the first one that we know of who very carefully did systematic dissections of the human body to see how it functioned.
He sets up a medical school in Alexandria and sets about looking at cadavers, but his methods are not always hugely popular.
The ancient Greeks don't believe in needing the body in the afterlife, like the ancient Egyptians and their mummies. But opening up corpses is still seen as dirty and a source of pollution. Herophilus, however, isn't dissuaded by these taboos.
He learns a lot through his dissections, taking very careful notes on the brain, the eye, the liver.
He even identifies a difference between nerves and arteries, which is a hugely important step in understanding how the human body works.
But before you sign up to the Herophilus fan club, there's something you should know.
Herophilus experimented on live candidates against their will, 600 prisoners.
Possibly because of this dark legacy, when Herophilus dies, so does his science of human dissection. And when Christianity sweeps across Europe in the Middle Ages, dissection goes from being unpopular to downright blasphemous.
The Christians believe that the human body will one day resurrect on Judgment Day, and so anatomy is a definite no-no.
The only acceptable reason to cut someone open was to do life-saving surgery. This was performed without anaesthetic, and often without knowing what the problem was inside until you got there.
When we think of surgery now, the first thing that comes to mind is a very clean, careful environment. But it wasn't always this way.
For most of human history, surgery was a barbaric, risky procedure and always a last resort. Which makes even more sense when the person cutting you open is also your hairdresser.
Throughout Europe in the Middle Ages, it was quite common to have barber surgeons. So it was a person who would not only give you a haircut, but would also perform operations like amputations or removing your teeth.
That's the sort of portfolio career you just don't see nowadays. It wasn't until the 1800s that we would have a revolutionary new way to look inside ourselves without going under the knife.
Oh, you can see inside me.
There's my heart. Oh dear, I think my liver's a bit knackered. That's too much wine in the liver then.
Which, of course, brings us back to this guy.
Wilhelm Röntgen is a professor of physics living in Germany, and he's studying the brand new science of cathode rays.
He's got what's called a Crookes tube. It's essentially a tube of glass that when he runs electricity through it, beams of electrons stream from the negative end, the cathode, to the anode.
Wilhelm is fascinated by these glowing tubes when he notices something strange.
He's darkened the room so he can see things well, and he's got the Crookes tube going, but it's inside of a box. And he notices a little cardboard sheet starts to glow. And this really intrigues him because there's no way that any light can get from the Crookes tube all the way over there to affect it.
So Wilhelm uses the age-old, highly accurate experimental procedure that we all know of as the switch it off, switch it on again method. He's able to confirm that the glowing sheet is being produced by something invisible coming out from the Crookes tube. But what? Like any good scientist, he starts to play.
He realizes it can pass through all sorts of things. He puts things in the way it can pass through walls, yet he or nobody else can see it. So he's got this mysterious beam that he decides to just label X because he doesn't know what it is. And it becomes known as the X-ray.
Now, what happens next is a little unclear, because when Wilhelm Röntgen dies in 1923, he has all of his lab notes destroyed. But we think it happened something like this.
Röntgen is so excited that he just can't leave his own laboratory. He ends up sleeping there, eating there, experimenting with this brand new ray that he's accidentally discovered.
He soon works out that his new ray can pass through the tissues of the body, but not bones or metal objects.
He finds that by using the right kind of photographic film, he can actually use the ray to take an image, and he brings his wife Anna in to basically take a photo of the inside of her hand. And so what we get is her bones in her hand, an X-ray with the wedding ring showing as well. And she is so shocked, she says, "I have seen my own death."
It's only a few months later that Wilhelm gives his first public speech to the Medical Society, performing a live X-ray. The crowd is astounded and news spreads rapidly.
This is a brand new phenomenon, and it immediately becomes popularized at things like traveling fairs, where people will set up these crude X-ray machines and folks come over and can stand in front of it and get pictures taken of their bones.
The public is captivated, and Röntgen's discovery spreads like wildfire. Soon it's being shown off for entertainment in the US, Europe, and across the globe.
The medical community starts to cotton on to the idea that there is this device that can see through tissues, and this starts to really become interesting to them.
The impact of Röntgen's accidentally discovered X-rays on medical treatment is huge. Within a month of his lecture, medical radiographs, as they were then called, had been made in Europe and the United States by surgeons to guide their work.
X-ray motion pictures show that as we step down on the ball of the foot, the ankle acts as a movable pivot.
Marie Curie is studying at the University of Paris when she first hears about Wilhelm's discovery. Although the mechanism behind X-rays production is unknown, she's fascinated by them and recognizes their link to her work on a new concept that she's coined radioactivity.
In 1898, Marie Curie, using an electrometer devised by her husband Pierre, began to examine all the elements then known for traces of radiation.
By World War I, the medical community has definitely cottoned on to the idea that X-rays are useful. And hospitals have these X-ray machines, but they're huge and they're cumbersome. Madame Curie gets in there and says, okay, we need to be able to take these to the front lines, to places where soldiers need them immediately.
Along the coast, close to the beaches and ports of each receiving area, there were to be holding hospitals, fully equipped for emergency surgery.
So she designs these little Curie wagons, petit Curie, where she actually puts these small mobile X-ray machines onto trucks and designs a dynamo that can go in them so that the thing is charged by the movement of the vehicle. Absolutely extraordinarily ahead of its time.
Along with the little Curies, these vehicles, she's responsible for the creation of 200 semi-permanent X-ray tents at military bases.
Those vehicles and tents save countless lives.
Now, X-rays in themselves are really great. However, they've also led to other incredible inventions, such as CT scans, which are kind of like an extension of X-ray, but allow you to see even more detail into the human body.
So thanks to X-rays, we've made a brave new medical world.
But the impact of Wilhelm's accidental discovery extends far beyond looking inside ourselves.
We do have a few towns.
We started to turn X-rays to the skies above. There's a brand new field in astronomy called X-ray astronomy, and it's allowed us to peer deeper into the universe and be able to understand new things about our cosmos.
July 23rd, 1999. NASA launches the most powerful X-ray telescope ever built.
The Chandra X-ray Observatory, a really brilliant telescope that was able to observe parts of the universe that we hadn't really understood before.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
The Earth's atmosphere blocks most X-rays coming from space. By having an orbiting telescope, we're able to see very faint X-ray emissions.
The resolution is so good on this telescope that it's like reading a stop sign from 12 miles away.
This remarkable clarity allows us to explore the very hot regions of our universe.
Being able to detect X-rays in space has led to so many more understandings about our universe, such as detecting exploding stars, different parts of galaxies, and even black holes.
I just think that's really cool. I love how X-rays can be used at sort of on the micro scale and the macro scale. So we're able to learn about the structure of DNA and the structure of the universe. I just think there's something poetic about that.
Still to come, how an attempt to stop paper curling up changes America's political landscape.
The population shift to the deep south caused by air conditioning means that anybody running for president in the United States has to get those southern states.
And how a kid's toy helps save lives.
They were able to get reception through the canopy and able to communicate from the jungle.
But first, men have been balding since we were apes. And we've tried almost everything to avoid losing our precious hair.
After a long day of ruling the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar has some honeyed apricots, drinks a little wine, takes off his toupee, and goes to bed. Caesar was one of millions, possibly billions of people affected by hair loss and hiding it with a signature wreath.
Nowadays, a hairless head is quite cool. Maybe that's because we now have a choice. A proven chemical formula that can keep hair on your head. But the road to that solution has been a long, twisted and knotting one.
The most common type of hair loss is male pattern baldness. 95% of people who start to lose their hair, they have this kind of hair loss. It's caused by a combination of genetics, hormones, and environmental factors like stress.
It took almost 2,000 years after Caesar for us to find a chemical cure. But to understand how it works, you need to know why we go bald in the first place.
Every day, around 10% of the testosterone in a male body is converted into a hormone known as DHT. But when too much of this DHT is produced, it can cause hair follicles to become smaller, which then causes the hairs that are growing from them to become shorter and thinner. Eventually, the follicles can shrink completely and stop producing hair. Women who also have testosterone in their bodies can also be affected. In fact, it's thought that 70% of men and 40% of women will experience hair loss in their lifetime.
People have lost hair and tried to find ways to keep it throughout history.
Now, according to one ancient Egyptian document, the Ebers Papyrus, that dates back to 1150 BC, the best way to cure baldness is to use fat from either a lion or serpent or an ibex, or better still, a hippopotamus.
It's thought that these remedies came from ancient advice thousands of years before they were even written down.
It might seem strange to fight against such a natural process for so long, but for many religions and cultures across the world, hair has deep significance.
Sikhism is the world's 5th leading religion with about 25 million followers. And many Sikhs don't cut their hair. They let it grow long, very long, as a sign of respect for God's creation.
Much of Native American culture centers around nature and the earth, with some traditions saying that long hair is kind of symbolic, connecting them to Mother Earth, whose hair is long grasses.
I like that idea of the long swaying grasses being the hair of Mother Earth.
Away from religion, hair still carries meaning. It was such a big deal in 17th century Europe that wigs became fashionable, even for those with a luxurious barnet.
King Louis XIV of France, he was extremely vain. I mean, he commissioned 300 portraits of himself, which is like the modern equivalent of like taking a ton of selfies. Man, that's self-absorbed.
But poor King Louis had a problem with his crown.
He had started to go bald at the age of 17, and he felt like it was not appropriate for, a king to be balding. So he hired 48 wig makers to create a wonderful selection of hair pieces.
Louis's new updo starts a fashion trend on the other side of the English Channel.
King Charles II had spent a long period of exile in France while Cromwell was running England, and he picked up this French taste for wigs, not least because his own hair was greying. So when he came back to England as the Merry Monarch, you see in his portraits, he's there with this beautiful long brown wig. Whatever the king does, everybody else had to do. The king and the queen were the leaders of fashion. So when Charles starts to wear a wig, everybody else has to wear big, long wigs.
That continues into the 20th century.
It's a scalp treatment that female collaborationists have been getting in many countries. Norway, Denmark, Corsica, and now France.
Let's fast forward to 1950s America. There's another king around, and an accidental cure for baldness is just around the corner.
Upjohn is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America in the 1950s. Now, it's developed a new drug to treat ulcers, but it's a complete flunk.
During animal trials, the researchers find that the compound didn't actually cure ulcers, but they did, however, notice a side effect which could prove very interesting.
The drug appears to lower blood pressure, and hypertension is really common. If you can address that, you can make a lot of money.
So, Upjohn create 200 variants of this new drug, each slightly different from the next. They're trying to find an effective treatment for hypertension, that is, blood pressure that if left untreated will cause heart disease.
Among the variations is one called minoxidil. During the trials at a medical school in Colorado, 2 dermatologists are called in, Dr. Khan and Dr. Grant, because one of the patients is having a rather strange side effect.
So they walk in to meet a woman in her mid-40s who is perfectly normal, except she's like the hairiest woman they've ever seen. And this poor woman has hair all over her face.
This heart drug has an unforeseen side effect, a very noticeable unforeseen side effect. It promotes hair growth. The patient is distraught, but the doctors are delighted.
Dr. Khan and Dr. Grant are well aware of how hard humans have tried to find a treatment for balding.
But it seems that is exactly what they've stumbled upon.
They instantly know that, hey, if they can create the right formula that you can just apply to the skin, man, they're gonna make it big. They're gonna hit that jackpot.
They get to work testing minoxidil immediately.
Grant starts applying this stuff to the skin on his forearm every day for months, trying different combinations of liquids and concentrations.
One day he looks at a section of his arm where he's been applying the lotion and it's grown new thick hairs and he's ecstatic.
Well, he does look quite pleased.
Sure enough, there's an unmistakable 1-inch square of new hairs growing on his forearm.
So how has this failed hypertension drug suddenly made growing back hair a possibility?
Minoxidil is a vasodilator, which means that it causes the veins in the body to expand, allowing more blood to flow more freely. By increasing the blood flow around the hair follicles, Dr. Grant is able to increase the amount of oxygen and the amount of nutrients that are getting to the hair follicle, and that encourages the hair to grow thicker and faster.
The two of them, Grant and Khan, go back to the Upjohn Pharmaceutical Company and declare, "We've got a gold mine."
And they were right. Within a few years, doctors are prescribing minoxidil, now trademarked as Rogaine, to their bald patients, and the money starts pouring in.
The medication can help some people with hair loss to grow new hair.
We now know that minoxidil works on somewhere between 40 and 60% of men. So this accidental discovery could potentially benefit around 2.2 billion people worldwide.
The Rogaine revolution has changed people's lives just by giving them a thatch up top. And it's also, of course, a drug that you can buy over the counter.
If you don't use it every day, then you're going to see a drop in the effect. If you quit using it, you can pretty well plan that whatever hair you've gained over time, you're going to lose again.
Currently, the value of the minoxidil market is $880 million, and it's expected to rise by a third by 2024. Researchers believe that the number of people going bald is going to increase over the years because of lifestyle factors like smoking more or drinking more or stress. On top of that, the fact that in many countries we have aging populations means that more people are going to be using such products for longer, which means that the market's only going one way, up.
There's no doubt that hair loss is a journey, and it's either a journey to the sunny uplands of bearded bald glory, or it's a descent into hell for some people. They want to reverse it. It can even affect their career, their relationships. Luckily for me, over the last 20 years, it's actually become reasonably fashionable to be bald and bearded. If I'd been born 20, 30, 40, 100 years earlier, yes, it might have been a grim experience.
So it's thanks to a faulty drug trial and an unexpectedly hairy woman that millions of people now have the option to stop baldness in its tracks. That is, if they want to.
For men in particular, I think you kind of have to decide what kind of a person are you going to be going into middle age. Are you relaxed about it, chilled? Do you like that kind of distinguished bald look, like I have? Or do you decide you're going to fight it, that you want to keep your youthfulness? It's really a statement about you, whether or not you walk into the chemist and buy Rogaine.
Coming up, how a child's toy has changed the face of communications.
It's really the next stage of satellites.
But first this. It's hot. Too hot. The air is dry. The sun is beating down. It feels almost too much to bear. Until...
You know the refreshing feeling when it's just so hot out, but then you get instant relief from, say, like jumping in a pool or drinking a cold drink? Yeah, that is the best feeling in the world.
For centuries, humans have been searching for relief from the heat. But the journey to air conditioning is a long one.
Even in ancient Egypt, people had ways of dealing with it. They would take a mat or a piece of clothing, dip it in water, hang it on the doorway, so that when a breeze came, this air, this cooled air, would come towards them and cool them down.
It was a sort of early air conditioning, and the Egyptians weren't the only ones to try and find a solution.
One of the madder, more megalomaniac emperors of the Roman Empire, Elagabalus, would order slaves up into the mountains to go and collect loads of snow, which were then piled up, and as the snow melted, it carried cool air through the palace rooms.
That doesn't sound crazy, just labour-intensive. 2,000 miles east in Persepolis, they'd found a much more accessible way of keeping cool.
So let's go back 2,500 years, and the Persian Empire is ruling the Middle East. But they've got a problem. A lot of the empire is far away from the sea, far away from sources of cooling wind. And so they have to address this. They have to find a way to make life bearable for their people.
The Persians come up with an ingenious technological innovation.
They construct these tall and broad wind towers on buildings that captures air at a higher level and channels it down through the building, and it runs down over underground channels of cooling water and then cools the rooms above.
Like I said, ingenious. But this is the story of how we got modern air conditioning. So let's hit the fast forward button. Whoa, far too far. That's better.
So it's 1902 in the United States, and for several decades there's been an industrial revolution in that country, with factories opening everywhere, making all sorts of things.
It's midsummer in Brooklyn, and it's sticky.
Now there's a printing press making a top-selling magazine, and they've got a problem. Because the ink is running, the workers are sweating, and the paper is curling.
It's not the heat that's the problem, it's the moisture. Enter Willis Haviland Carrier. He's just graduated Cornell with a master's in engineering. Clever chap.
Willis now gets an opportunity to work in the printing room. He is hired to try and come up with a solution for the humidity that is causing so many problems in the printing press.
How does he do this, you ask? Well, weirdly enough, it all starts on a train platform.
So Willis Carrier is standing on a train station in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he sees this fog.
Willis, on seeing the fog, thinks, what if I can make the water vapour in the air condense to become a liquid? That way, I can make the air drier and stop those newspaper presses from smudging.
When there's water molecules zooming through the air like on a humid day, and they come in contact with a cold glass of water, they lose energy and go into their liquid form, hence causing the condensation on your glass of water.
Willis creates a mechanism of coils that mimics what we're going to call the cold glass of water on a hot day effect, and then passes air over them.
And what happens is, in turn, the air that was humid now starts to become dry because the moisture is attracted to the coils, and the air all around it is now becoming dry and less damp.
His dehumidifying machine is a success. Willis's system of chilled coils maintains a constant and comfortable humidity of 55%. This solves the problem of smudged ink and curling paper. But the machine also has a pleasant side effect. As well as drying the air, it also cools it.
So Willis has invented the first modern air conditioning. But let's be clear about this. Factory bosses weren't putting it in for love of the workers. They were putting it in to protect their product and to be more efficient.
While Carrier's machine keeps the workers cool at work, a sweltering shack still awaits them back at home.
So what happens, ironically, is that workers want to spend more time in the workplace, which is great news for bosses.
Thanks to air conditioning, factories and offices can remain at a constant cool temperature, thereby increasing productivity and profit.
Who's this, I hear you ask? This is Margaret Ingalls, and she plays a crucial role in Willis's company.
Margaret Ingalls was no ordinary woman. At a time that few women attended university at all, she graduated from the University of Kentucky with an engineering degree, the second woman in the entire United States to do so.
Willis and Margaret worked together to develop the aircon machine, making it smaller and more powerful. Soon, comfort air conditioning is turning up in theatres, department stores and banks, not to make them drier, but exclusively to make them cooler.
Margaret crisscrosses the country, extolling the virtues of the air conditioner and making clear that it's not just something that big factories should have, it's something that the ordinary American could have in their home.
You know what this is?
An air conditioner.
That's right.
Aircon became a signifier of social mobility pretty early on, and you get a crazy situation where motorists in the United States would keep their windows rolled up to pretend they had aircon in their vehicles, that they were rich enough to have it.
Air conditioners changed America. Now you could buy chocolate in June or sit comfortably inside a cinema in August.
Right around this time, public perception begins to shift, and it goes from being this sort of luxury item to being almost a must-have in homes. In 1938, only about 1 in every 400 homes had an air conditioning unit, and today it's closer to 9 out of 10.
This popularity results in the US using as much electricity for air conditioning alone each year as the United Kingdom uses in total.
It's sadly one of the ironies of life today that with global warming, of course, there's more and more demand for air conditioners. There's about 1 billion of them out there.
Willis's accidental cooling machine has impacted people's lives in ways that he could never have imagined.
There was a time in America, if you walked down the street, the chatter was on the porches. People were sitting outside their homes in order to keep cool. But with aircon from the 1950s onwards, the chatter moved indoors. People in a way became more private.
The impact doesn't stop there. Air conditioning causes a huge population shift across America in a way that will change politics forever.
In the early 1900s, most people were located in more northern states of the US, such as New York and other areas, mainly because of the temperature. It was a lot cooler. And where the southern states were just really hot. With the air conditioner, that completely changed where people lived. More people started moving further south.
Within 10 years of aircons becoming really popular, Tucson sees a boost in its population of about 400%, Phoenix by about 300%, and other cities in the Midwest and the Deep South grow massively.
The Sun Belt is born, first coined as a term in the early 1970s. In just 50 years, the US population concentrated there increases from 28% to 40%.
The population shift to the Deep South caused by air conditioning means that anybody running for president in the United States has to get those southern states. And the first president who did that was Ronald Reagan. He turned the whole of the South red Republican.
Wow! So air conditioning affected politics. I never knew that. But what I do know is that this accidental invention has changed our world. We wouldn't have cities like Las Vegas or Dubai, and Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, has said that air conditioning was the most important innovation in his country's development.
Singapore is a beautiful country within 100 miles of the equator with amazing food and a mix of cultures, but temperatures do regularly hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit.
Shops couldn't stay open long in Singapore because of the heat. In fact, they would close at around 11:30 a.m. just so people could go shelter from that heat. So most of the time, you can only work during dawn and dusk.
As well as allowing workers to work longer hours through the day, air conditioning also allowed businesses to put in place big supercomputers.
And it's big, powerful computers that can do the kind of financial trading that Singapore is famous for today. Share trading can be a pretty heated business as it is, but you don't want your computers to overheat, and aircon is what you need to keep them cool.
Today, Singapore is a global centre for financial trading.
Singapore is the wealthiest country in Asia with a per capita income of $54,000. And it also ranks highly in terms of health, education, social welfare. And also, of course, it has very fast internet connection. And you can thank aircon for a lot of that.
Standing on that train platform in Pittsburgh, Willis could never have imagined that his invention for drying out newspaper printing presses would cool the world, shift a political landscape, and even transform entire economies. You might be surprised to learn that some of our favourite childhood toys were not actually designed with children in mind. December 1941, Pearl Harbor Naval Base, Hawaii.
Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Life in the Navy is tough. The crew have to keep looking out for enemy ships, but that's really hard to do when the sea is surging, gales raging, waves crashing. You're practically walking on the walls because everything's so topsy-turvy and nothing's pinned, so everything's moving about.
This problem consumes naval engineer Richard James. Sensitive instruments are constantly breaking in the swelling seas. And by 1943, he's convinced that suspending them with torsion springs is the answer.
Richard is working away in his lab when he has a little bit of a clumsy moment and knocks one of his springs off a bench. But rather than just flumping on the floor, it does something slightly different.
It ends up stepping over itself in arches, where it goes from the books to the table to eventually the floor.
Richard is surprised by what the spring does. And like any good inventor, he uses his lateral thinking to see whether there may be a different use for this kind of spring and its weird behaviour.
But who would possibly be interested in a weird spring with no practical uses?
It's Slinky, for fun is the best of the toys. It's Slinky, the favorite of girls and boys. Everyone wants a Slinky, you ought to get a Slinky.
Kids, of course.
What walks downstairs alone or in pairs and makes a slinkity sound. A spring, a marvelous thing. Everyone knows it's Slinky, it's Slinky, it's Slinky.
Richard and his wife Betty are convinced that this silly spring will be a hit with children. They get a $500 loan to make 400 units. And they sell none of them.
But they managed to convince a leading department store to let them do an in-store Christmas demonstration.
Richard and Betty build a ramp and set the Slinky on its merry way, much to the delight of onlooking customers. What was a disaster becomes a sensation.
They were able to sell 400 in just 2 hours.
And that is a sign of things to come. In just 2 years, they sell 100 million toys.
There were so many children in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, even in the 80s, who had a Slinky or wanted a Slinky.
I still remember getting my first Slinky. It was from the gift shop of the Science Museum in London, and I was thrilled. I spent days, if not weeks, trying to get that thing to walk down the stairs in one uninterrupted go.
Who walks the stair without a care and makes the happiest sound? Bounce up and down just like a clown. Everyone knows it's Slinky.
The company create a really popular jingle for this incredibly popular toy. In fact, it's so enduring that it's actually the longest running jingle in advertising history.
The catchy song first airs in 1962. 28 years later, 90% of American adults knew the jingle.
Part of its appeal at the time was the fact that Slinky could be advertised to boys and girls.
Not many toys can stand the test of time, but the Slinky remains a firm family favourite all over the world for around 75 years.
Giving the company a profit of $3 billion.
But away from the playground, the Slinky found another role. One that was much closer to its roots, back in war.
During the Vietnam War, soldiers were fighting through the jungle, so communication here was key.
But getting a signal in the middle of the jungle before the invention of the mobile phone is just as hard as it sounds.
Soldiers would have to carry a huge communications unit on their back. The radio system weighed 54 pounds and had a huge antenna sticking out of the back.
I have to go down and check out this VC village down here. A lot of booby traps in there, a lot of underbrush. Good concealment for these booby traps. Want to keep your eyes open, keep spread out. Any questions? Okay, man, let's move out.
To get a signal and to communicate, they'd have to go up a hill and raise a 10-foot radio antenna. Now, of course, this is a bit like waving a flag to your enemies, because the enemy could see exactly where they were.
The soldiers come up with a brilliant solution.
Rather than having a really big, heavy backpack with a long antenna to communicate with one another, you could actually use a Slinky, which is super compressed, and you can throw it over a branch, which would extend it and make it basically like an antenna.
They were able to get reception through the canopy and able to communicate from the jungle.
Sure, Juliet, this is Iron Hat 2. Roger out.
I don't think it's a stretch to say that Slinky played a huge part in the war. It certainly massively improved communications.
As America fights the Vietnam War, across the globe in Hungary, a curious professor peacefully tinkers away with some blocks, unaware that he's about to accidentally invent another childhood favourite.
Rubrik is a professor on interior design in Hungary, and he wants to find a way to explain 3D modeling and geometric design to his students.
He wants to create a structure through which each individual block can be moved without the whole structure falling apart.
He's messing around with wooden blocks and rubber bands and paper clips to try and create this structure until finally he creates something that he calls the magic cube.
He's thrilled because he finds the geometry of the cube very exciting. But it's not until he scrambles the blocks that he realizes he stumbled upon something far more magical than he imagined.
After he rearranges it a few times, he finds it quite difficult to get it back to how it first started.
quite difficult. In fact, it took him over a month to solve it. His reason for taking so long? Because I was the first who tried, he said. Which is fair enough.
This is when he realized that he's created a puzzle.
And not just any puzzle.
It's a very difficult puzzle. It's very hard to overstate its difficulty. In fact, the difficulty probably adds to the fascination.
I was just about ready to throw it through the window or something, and they really are just addictive.
The Rubik's Cube has 43 quintillion different combinations, all aiming to get back to one very special configuration. So no wonder people get addicted to the challenge of it.
It does not succumb to wishful thinking, trying hard, or intuition.
It did take me 4.5 hours the first time. My hands were so tired I couldn't write afterwards.
Much like the Slinky, it takes a while for the toy to take off. In 1980, sales of Rubik's Magic Cube are pretty modest. But all that is about to change.
Erno Rubik licenses the cube to an American toy company, and they actually name it after him, the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, I think we got that.
A successful ad campaign puts it into everyone's minds. The toy wins awards in Europe and in the USA, and all of this kickstarts the 1980s craze.
The Rubik's Cube becomes the best-selling toy in history. By the mid-80s, it's thought that as many as 1 in 5 people on the planet have played with the toy themselves.
If I give the cube to anybody, anywhere, speaking on any languages, he understands what to do.
Since Rubik invented it, it's sold about 450 million worldwide.
While the 80s craze has passed, it's had such an impact on our lives that it's entered into every aspect of popular culture.
It's appeared in tons of music videos. It's inspired hundreds of artists for paintings and sculptures.
There are even buildings across the world that have been inspired by the Rubik's Cube.
Cubing competitions have also become a big deal.
Speed cubing becomes an incredibly popular competition where people try and solve a Rubik's Cube in the quickest possible time. The World Cube Organization holds 700 competitions across the world each year, everywhere from Guatemala to Algeria to Mongolia.
The current world record for solving a Rubik's Cube is less than 4 seconds. That's roughly 1 month faster than it took Erno.
The youngest person to solve a Rubik's Cube was 3 years old. Let's see what you got.
Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Solving it with 2 hands while sat in a comfortable chair is almost cheating these days. Now there's blind cubing, juggling, robots that can solve the puzzle, and even extreme cubing.
Oh, no. Yes.
But the Rubik's Cube can be so much more than an idle distraction.
The Rubik's Cube has played a huge part in managing mental health issues like ADHD. There's something very tactile about the sensory feedback that you get when playing with one of these, the clicking and the spinning, a little bit like a fidget spinner. The sensory stimulation can be used to help with anxiety and other disorders.
So what does the future hold for the humble Rubik's Cube? Space?
Satellites play a big part in our everyday lives, helping us communicate, helping us find our way, and so much more.
You're missing one fantastic sight.
Satellites can weigh as much as a school bus, or maybe sometimes even more. And so that makes it pretty heavy and expensive to launch to space.
I guess being the so-called rookie.
Enter the CubeSat. inspired by none other than Erno's magic cube.
CubeSats are cube satellites. They're a lot smaller, only about 20 pounds, and they can be about the size of, say, the Rubik's Cube here.
These tiny satellites are made up of multiple cubic modules that can open up in orbit. Their tiny size makes them 1,000 times cheaper than a traditional larger satellite. So far, more than 1,600 have been put into orbit.
It's really the next stage of satellites.
From communications in the jungle to reaching out to outer space. The Slinky and Rubik's Cube show how even the most playful inventions can have a far-reaching impact.
So just looking at a wide range of toys in general, they have made such a huge impact on human history, on our life, on science, and of course our childhood.
I give up.